Your son can live a normal life. As a girl, the consultation room was quiet. It was 1967 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Approximately 49.895 1 degree north, 97.138 4 degree west. Snow pressed against the hospital windows. Inside, two terrified parents sat across from a confident American psychologist who believed he could reshape human identity. On August 22, 1965, twin boys had been born to Janet and Ron Reimer, Bruce and Brian Reimer. 7 months later, during a routine circumcision using an electrocautery device at a Winnipeg clinic, something went catastrophically wrong. The machine malfunctioned. Bruce's penis was destroyed. Doctors had no reconstructive options available in 1966. The Reimers were desperate. That's when they saw a television interview featuring Dr. John Money. Money was a psychologist and sexologist at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, approximately 39.3299 degree N, 76.6205 degree W. He was internationally respected. He had pioneered the theory that gender identity was not innate, that it was primarily shaped by environment. In academic papers during the 1950s and 1960s, Money introduced the concept of gender role and gender identity. His theory suggested that if a child was raised consistently as one sex from infancy, identity would follow. To the Reimers, he offered hope. Surgically remove the damaged genital tissue. Raise Bruce as a girl. Do not tell the child. Start hormone treatments at puberty. The child would grow up believing she was female and live a normal life. It was presented as science, as certainty, as modern progress. In July 1967, at 22 months old, Bruce Reimer underwent an orchiectomy, surgical removal of his tests. He was renamed Brenda. Dr. John Money would later publish the case as a groundbreaking success. In 1972, he wrote in the Archives of Sexual Behavior that Brenda was adjusting well, displaying typical female behavior. The case became one of the most cited examples supporting the theory that nurture outweighs nature. Medical textbooks referenced it. University lectures celebrated it. Across North America and Europe, doctors began recommending gender reassignment for infants born with ambiguous genitalia. But inside the Reimer household in Winnipeg, reality looked very different. From early childhood, Brenda resisted dresses. She preferred toy guns over dolls. She fought with classmates. She felt different. Teachers described her as aggressive. By age 9, Brenda was severely depressed. She told her parents she felt like a boy. She did not know why, because she had never been told the truth. Dr. Money required annual visits to Johns Hopkins. In Baltimore, Brenda and Brian were subjected to sessions that would later become deeply controversial. David Reimer, as he would later reclaim his name, reported that Money forced the twins to rehearse sexualized scenarios, instructing them to assume positions and roles intended to reinforce gender identity. These accounts emerged publicly years later and remained disputed in some academic circles. But the psychological damage was undeniable. Brenda became withdrawn, anxious, suicidal. By age 13, she threatened self-harm if forced to see Dr. Money again. In 1980, when Brenda was 15 years old, her father finally told her the truth. You were born male. Your name was Bruce. The effect was immediate. Brenda cut her hair short, adopted male clothing, chose a new name, David. He later said he chose it after the biblical David who defeated Goliath. He began testosterone therapy, underwent chest reconstruction surgery. Later, as an adult, he married a woman named Jane in 1990 and adopted her children. For a brief period, it seemed like stability had returned. But the psychological scars never fully healed. David's twin brother, Brian, struggled with schizophrenia and depression. On July 1st, 2002, Brian died from an overdose of antidepressants. 2 years later, on May 4th, 2004, David Reimer died by suicide at age 38. The story might have remained hidden, another private tragedy, if not for one man, Dr. Milton Diamond. A psychologist at the University of Hawaii, Diamond had long criticized John Money's conclusions. In 1997, Diamond collaborated with journalist John Colapinto to publish the true story in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. Colapinto later expanded it into a book titled As Nature Made Him. The revelation sent shockwaves through medical and psychological communities, because for decades, John Money had presented the case as proof that gender identity was socially constructed. Medical decisions affecting thousands of children were influenced by that narrative. But the experiment had failed, and the failure had been concealed. The dark truth is not just that a child was raised as the wrong sex. It's that a respected academic built a career on incomplete and arguably misleading data. John Money never publicly admitted wrongdoing. He defended his work until his death on July 7th, 2006. The ethical debate surrounding his methods intensified after David's death. Why wasn't the outcome reported accurately? Why were the negative results suppressed? Why were vulnerable parents presented with certainty where there was none? In the 1960s and 1970s, the field of gender research was still emerging. The American Psychiatric Association classified gender identity disorder in its diagnostic and statistical manual. Cultural norms were rigid. The idea that identity could be molded through environment aligned with broader mid-century social theories. But David Reimer's life became counter-evidence. Not proof of a simple binary truth, but proof that identity is complex, resistant, deeply rooted. And that experimentation on children without informed consent carries consequences. The climax of this story is not a courtroom verdict. There was no criminal trial, no prison sentence. It is the moment in 1980 when a 15-year-old boy learned that his entire childhood had been a controlled experiment, that his body had been surgically altered to test a theory, that his identity had been assigned like a hypothesis. Imagine that realization. The cold Winnipeg air outside, the silence in the room, the weight of 15 years collapsing into a single truth. The aftermath reshaped medical ethics. Intersex treatment protocols began to change. Doctors became more cautious about early surgical intervention. Long-term psychological outcomes became central to care discussions. The case is now studied in bioethics courses worldwide, not as a triumph, but as a warning. The Winnipeg Clinic, where the circumcision occurred, no longer exists in its original form. Johns Hopkins continues to operate as a leading medical institution, but the case remains etched into its history. David Reimer did not choose to become a symbol. He wanted a normal life. He worked factory jobs. He tried to build stability. But trauma does not disappear because a theory collapses. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. When does scientific ambition override humility? When does confidence become arrogance? When does a hypothesis turn into harm? John Money believed he was helping. He believed gender was flexible. He believed early intervention would prevent stigma. But the human cost was immeasurable. David once said in interviews that he did not blame his parents. They were following medical advice. They trusted authority. That trust became the most devastating element of all, because it wasn't cruelty. It was certainty. The case did not end the nature versus nurture debate. It complicated it. It exposed the danger of oversimplification. And it revealed how easily a child's life can be shaped by adult conviction. The final image is not of a hospital, not of a surgical instrument. It is of a man in Winnipeg, trying to rebuild himself from fragments of identity handed to him by others. The boy who was raised as a girl. The experiment that proved something no one intended. And the reminder that when science forgets humility, it risks turning human lives into data points. The next time you hear someone say identity can be engineered, remember the cost of being wrong.